Hello friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start today's video with a story about the horrible roommate our OP had to put up with. After he got fed up with it, he hatched a plan, and it worked. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. D-bag roommate gets a goodbye present. When I was 20 years old, I moved from Philly to Florida for work. I worked at a bar that was expanding, and they paid some of us to transfer down and help get the store open. Originally, there was 4 of us splitting a 2-bedroom apartment. Later on, though, we added another roommate and decided to rent a house. I was the youngest in the house at 20, but also the most responsible. All bills were under my name. I collected the money for rent and everything else. While the new guy was 30 years old and loved the party lifestyle, we didn't know much about him except he was from New Jersey and he worked with us, but we needed a 5th guy to afford the house, so he was in. Living with this guy was a trip, but I can't say it wasn't fun. He did enjoy his cocaine, but when he'd go on a bender, he'd clean the house for hours from being so amped. Even though he made 3 times the money I did, I'd have to lend him money for bills and crap, but he'd always pay me back, and he was a horrific gambler. But watching him lose like mush from a Bronx Tale always made us laugh. No bullcrap, this guy could have been a Seinfeld character. All in all, he was a pretty good roommate. In the beginning. After a year, we decided we were all splitting up when our lease was up. My 3 other roommates all managed to knock their girlfriends up at roughly the same time, so we all gave notice that everyone had to find a new place to live. I could never just live with this guy alone, especially in a house that I needed 5 people in to afford. So we all started making our plans to move on. Well, in the last 3 or so months, this guy just changes. He buys a dog and just lets the dog crap and pee all over the house, expecting us to clean up after it. He'd go to work and tell us not to leave the dog in his room, crap like that. Even when we asked him to clean up after it, he ignored us. Then he starts going in the fridge and eating other roommates' food and drinks without asking or giving the slightest F. It was like, now that he knew he was a short-timer, he didn't care about being courteous anymore. He tried borrowing money from me, denied, and then when we were talking about splitting up the house furniture, he jumped right in wanting to know what was his. Only problem is the 4 of us bought all the furniture before he moved in. He put no money out for it, but he demanded he got something, so we gave him the barbecue grill because none of us wanted it. Finally, the time came where we started moving out. The 30-year-old was going to stay in the house by himself for a while and try to find more roommates. This was where my revenge came in. My 3 other roommates had moved out. One was moving to Maryland and agreed to move me back to Philly for free. He was picking me up at 6 a.m. on the day after Labor Day. Summer in South Florida. The week before, I called the phone company, the electric company, the cable company, and the water company, and had each scheduled to be shut off at 8 a.m. that morning. I made it a point to be clear that it had to be turned off at that time, and they all agreed. At 6 a.m., I left. 2 days later, I called up my other roommate who worked with his butt and asked if it went to plan. He told me it couldn't have went any better. He said the guy showed up at work covered in sweat and looking like a complete mess. Said he woke up at 9 a.m. sweating, so he went to check the thermostat and realized the AC wasn't working. So he went to the bathroom to wash his face, and lo and behold, he had no water either. So he had to go wash his face in the pool. Then he got dressed and realized he had no electric when he couldn't turn the lights on. Now he's flipping out, so he grabs an old electric bill and goes to call the electric company, only to find out he doesn't have a phone. He went down to the electric company to get it turned on, but back then you needed good credit and a valid ID to get electric and water turned on. I knew this from experience I had where I had to beg because my credit was just okay and I did have an ID. I knew for a fact his credit was awful, and he had no ID. Apparently, he was there for 3 hours, pleading with them to turn it on, to no luck. Then he had to go to work. He eventually got the landlord of the house to get it turned on under her name, but for 3 days in late summer in South Florida, he had no electricity, no phone, and no water, which meant he couldn't shower, and he had to flush his toilet with buckets of pool water. It was glorious. And our second story. Charge your own family for a drink? Get your stolen fruit fed to you. This happened like 30 years ago. When I was a kid, I had a notoriously cheap uncle. They called him Joe Green because he hoarded money so much. Well, Uncle Joe had a summer house in the Jersey Shore, right on the bay in Wildwood, along with his home in Philly. His shore house was right next to the fishing charter boats, and to make extra money, he'd stock up on things like bait, canned soda, lunch meat, etc., and sell it to the guys going out fishing for the day. Nice way to make some tax-free money sitting on your back deck in the morning. One day, my family's down there visiting. I was only like 10 years old and thirsty. I asked Uncle Joe for a soda. Like I said, he had tons of cases stacked up. He told me, sure, leave 50 cents on the table. I started laughing and asked if he was joking. He wasn't. I had to pay my uncle to have a soda at his house. Okay, whatever. Just gave us another story to share about what a effing cheapskate he was. I thought nothing of it after paying him, but my dad felt differently. A few months later, me and my father went on one of these party fishing boats by Uncle Joe's house. After he got back, my dad pulled up to my uncle's house. I told him it was pointless. His car wasn't there. He obviously was in Philly that day. My dad just looked at me and said, I know. Now, my uncle had a peach tree growing in his front yard. He'd brag all spring about how they were coming along and how they were almost ripe. Well, it looked like they were finally ripe. My dad gets me out of the car, grabs a bushel from the trunk, and we start picking all the peaches off his tree. We literally didn't leave one left. He told me we were doing it because he charged me 50 cents for the soda. I laughed the whole ride home. The next day, my dad split up the peaches. He left a big bowl for us, gave a bowl to my grandmother, some to my aunt, etc. So a few days later, I'm at my grandmother's, and she's cutting up the peaches. She'd put them in a bowl with sugar on them. It was divine. When my uncle walks in, he looked so depressed, and he starts telling my grandparents how somebody stole all the peaches off his tree. I'm sitting there trying not to burst out laughing as he's saying how he was so looking forward to eating them this year. My grandmother just looks up and says, here, have some of these. OP's father just gave them to me. At this point, I'm about to lose it. So he takes a little bowl and starts eating them and says, they're pretty good, but mine were a lot better. I had to walk out at that point and start cracking up out on the steps. I know it's pretty petty, and I'm sure some will think we were the a-hole here, but I don't know, growing up the way I did, that's just not how you treat family, especially the kids. And it's not like we really cost the guy anything. Charging 50 cents would have been the perfect storybook ending, but in real life it'd cause drama because then he'd know where the peaches came from. Family strife is all that would bring. No lessons learned. And our last story. Karen neighbor will park where she is always parked. Throwback to 2015. Moved into my new house, renovating and landscaping nonstop. Decide to use the driveway, which the previous owner did not use. It was concrete to the property line, but did not extend out to the road. I got all the relevant permissions and approvals and had the driveway extended all the way to the curb. Enter my Karen neighbor, who was parking on the street in front of my house where the entry to my new driveway now is. I told her about the driveway before I extended it, and she could clearly see how it was now a functioning driveway, but continued to park about 6 feet, 2 meters, over the entry. I squeezed past the first time and went straight next door and told her she just needs to move her car forward as she may have forgotten that the driveway is there now. But Karen did not forget. She did it on purpose, as the first words out of her mouth were, I've always parked there. I was a little dumbfounded at first as I hadn't had any problems with her since I moved in a few months earlier. I told her that she can't park there anymore as it's now a driveway and I can't use it if she's parked in front of it. She doubled down and said, well, I'm not moving. I've always parked in that spot. You should have put your driveway on the other side. I asked her if she was being serious, and she said she was, so I told her if she doesn't move, I'd have to call the police. She said, call the police. I know the sergeant, and he'll say I can park there. I called the police, and they came and made her move her car immediately. The police were shaking their heads in disbelief when they were talking to her. She started telling the police that she's been parking there for many years, and the police told her if she parks there again, they'll come back and fine her. So she moved. Fast forward a few weeks, and she's now parking right on the edge, about 2 inches from being in the way. Keep in mind, there's plenty of room in front of her own house. I decide not to worry about it because clearly she has serious mental issues, and I honestly can't be bothered at this stage. Well, at this point, the fun started. She'd start calling the police for anything and everything I did on my own property, from my lawnmower being too loud to the smell of paint while I was painting my house. She was watching everything I did. The police would turn up the first few times, but eventually stopped coming as they knew it was a Karen with an attitude problem, all because I asked her not to park over my driveway. One time, she managed to threaten my elderly father when he came to visit, and he parked over my driveway, which is fine because I told him to, and it's my driveway. She came outside and confronted my dad about it. She threatened to call the police. My dad gave her a few choice words that I can't repeat, and she went back inside her house. I ended up selling the property a few years later. I often wonder if the new owner's having the same Karen issues. I guess we'll never know. Just think what she could achieve if she were to channel all that negative energy into something positive. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.